So I'm very excited for the opportunity to be able to moderate this amazing panel on linking research and action for thriving forests, trees, and people. Thank you to Dan for this amazing conference and this amazing first day. And I'm sure that you will all agree by the end of this that we will be ending on a high, because we have an amazing panel that's going to really speak from lots of experience about the challenges and opportunities and successes and lessons learned about how exactly to link all this amazing research on forests and livelihoods to practice and policy. So I want to start by just introducing these amazing panelists. And then after the introductions, each one of the panelists is going to take 3 to 5 minutes to speak about generally why it's important to link research to policy and practice, why to go that extra mile, and not just focus on our academic silos and really being deep in the weeds. And then we're going to turn it around into a panel discussion where I'll ask them some questions. And the last 15 minutes will be your opportunity to ask questions. So if you have questions that come up, write them down, and we'll do that at the end. Also, for those of you on Zoom, Dan will be taking your questions, and you'll have an opportunity to ask as well. So I'm very excited to introduce our first panelist, Éliane Ubalijoro, who is the CEO of CIFOR-ICRAF, which is this amazing location where we are based right now. And you may not know this, but before this incredible leadership role, she also served as a professor of practice for public-private sector partnerships at McGill University. So she really knows all of these angles very deeply. And she has a very interesting background, a mixture of expertise in agriculture, but also molecular genetics. And has been recognized for outstanding contributions in the areas of innovation, gender equity, and sustainable prosperity creation. She serves on numerous international and Africa focus boards, too many to go through here, and also too many experiences to highlight. So I just picked a few. For the purposes of this roundtable, I'll just want to point to her amazing work promoting women's leadership, harnessing global networks for sustainable development, and promoting global open data for agriculture and nutrition. So welcome, our esteemed panelists. I'll just get Thank you. Our next panelist is Dr. Jane Njuguna, and she is the acting director and senior deputy director of research and development at the Kenya Forestry Research Institute. And Dr. Njuguna has a background in botany, forest science, and zoology. And her organization focuses on providing information and technology to foresters and forestry officials to promote more sustainable practices. Thank you very much, and welcome to our panelists. Our next panelist to the right is Rahima Njaidi, and she is the executive director of MJUMITA. Is that also silent M? Okay, MJUMITA, which is a community forest conservation network of Tanzania. And she's actually a lawyer by profession, so we have this great match of natural sciences and law. And she's been working with local communities in Tanzania for the past 18 years, building their capacity and advocating for improved forest management. She's also been in the forefront of advocating for policy changes to ensure forest governments and community benefits are given a priority, which is something that's come up a lot today. And then finally, we have Dr. Alex Pfaff, who is a professor in the Sanford School of Public Policy at Duke University. And Dr. Pfaff is an economist, so he'll be rounding out our interdisciplinary panel. And he's been long working with and alongside public agencies and civil society organizations to design and evaluate a range of rights and incentive policies for forests, currently including the Lilongwe Water Board regarding tree planting and care in Malawi. And I just realized that I didn't give a separate round of applause for Rahima. So round of applause for our guest Rahima. Yeah, thank you. And then also for Alex. Thank you. Honestly, I'm like blushing just introducing these amazing people.
First of all, I just want to thank everyone for being here today. It's a real pleasure for us at CIFOR-ICRAF to be hosting FLAIR in Africa for the first time. So thank you for being here today. We're really delighted that this 9th annual meeting, the first on the African continent, is happening, and in general in the Global South is happening here in our Nairobi campus. So it's very fitting that FLAIR's first meeting in the Global South is held here, because this theme aligns so much of who we are at CIFOR-ICRAF, linking research to action for thriving forests, trees, and people. This theme is really important because at ICRAF and CIFOR, we really see this as a big part of what we do, working together with communities, partners on the ground to develop solutions. And really, what is really exciting for me around this theme, because it really comes down to the work we do. We work at the interface of biodiversity restoration, food security, and climate resilience. And we see the way to get there is how do we bring more equitable solutions that really promote green jobs, that allow us to have sustainable value chains in the forestry and the agro food systems that really support thriving food security and thriving restoration. And so it's a real delight for me to be here and to host all of you. And so welcome, Karibuni. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Njuguna, as you've been told, and I'm opening with a few remarks. I come from KEFRI. KEFRI is a national research institution that works at the interface of international organizations, the local communities, and the county governments. And our work is to undertake research and development in forestry, capacity build our stakeholders, train them, disseminate our research findings like we are doing now, and of course, form strategic linkages and partnerships. And I hope that at the end of it, we'll have formed partnerships with you, because KEFRI is the only national research institution in forestry. In talking about this, I realized the importance of this topic, that is connecting research and action. And I have over 30 years of research in forestry. I'm a forest pathologist. Kenyans called me the tree doctor, or the tree doctor of trees, ama daktari wa miti. And on this topic, I want to appreciate the organizers for inviting me to come and share a few of our experiences on this important topic. I appreciate those who co-authored this presentation with me. And we know that forests are indispensable, actually, for various reasons, ecological, socio-economic, and otherwise. And we know that maintaining these forests and resources is actually equal to maintaining our lives and livelihoods. The significance of trees and forests and the interconnectedness with us is it's not really described, or it's not describable, because we depend on trees one or the other. We have a picture of the natural forest and one of the commercial forest plantations that is established. And why then do we need to link research to action? After all, why are we doing research? It's for people, to understand people. And for the over 35 years of research that I have, I know for a fact that I have published a lot, and scientists who are here have published a lot. But if your publishing has only earned you promotions and it has not impacted the lives, you have probably spent a lot of your time doing mark timing. Mark timing in the defense forces. So if we are not doing research to benefit the people, then our monies are also not put in the right place. This presentation builds on work and research experiences built over the 30 years since KEFRI was formed, but forestry research has been around for 89 years. It is since 1934. That's what Forestry Research Department was established, but our institution was established in 1986. Therefore, we are reviewing experiences from various projects, and I have a few of examples that I want to talk about. The first one, and the very, very key, as I said in our mandate of research and development, how are we linked research to action? Our approach to research is thematic and ecological, and therefore our research is also site-specific. And KEFRI established this method of identifying research processes and problems since 2002, when we realized that the years of research was not reaching the people, or we were researching for ourselves. So the first thing that we do is it's our core mandate to involve communities and people wherever they're working. We also have learned the importance of research and linking in terms of promoting and intensifying tree growing through social forestry. And this has been supported by JICA and a number of other development partners. And out of this, we have seen that the link between the two, the technologies, has created millions of green jobs in the country, especially in the tree nurseries. And at the moment, Kenya has an ambitious program of developing or growing 15 billion, and this is basically based on research. We also have the development of superior germplasm of our indigenous tree species. And here the people has been very key, especially in terms of performance testing, because we, as an institution, we don't have a lot of research a lot of land to work on. But using farmers and farmers' fields, we have found it useful and easier to ensure adoption. So also we have all over the country, we have established demonstration plot, because sometimes when you talk to stakeholders, and especially in a country like ours where illiteracy levels vary, people need to see what you're talking about. So we have experienced that establishment of demo plots or demonstration plots is very important for stakeholders to understand what you're talking about. Number 4 is the research for policy, and we are happy to say that our research outputs, working with these people over time, we have been able to develop policy beliefs and influence the enactment of the Forest Act 2025, which was reviewed in 2016. And as this morning, we were actually seated with the Principal Secretary's office. We're actually reviewing it again, because now the other issues that have come up, the issues of climate change and carbon markets, which are heavily dependent on research. The other one is the review of policies and legislation to correspond with the emerging needs of climate change. Climate change sounded like a story 15 years ago, but it is real and it was not covered in our policies. So we have used the link to research and policies, especially to develop legislation that will incentivize tree growing for carbon markets. Number 6 is engagement of policy makers. As researchers, we spend a lot of our time, like myself, I have spent a lot of time in the lab understanding pathogens and what they do in the environment. But when you come out, just the way I said, I'm a tree doctor, everybody smiles. And in Kiswahili, when I say it in Kiswahili, I even sound more weird. So when I sound weird or funny, exactly. So the policy makers, imagine you are scientists and you are laughing, yeah? And you're smiling at what I'm saying. Imagine trying to explain to a member of a ward, a political somebody there who does not understand anything about what I'm talking about. So we have found it very necessary to have meetings, seminars with them, and also sometimes supporting them for conferences, and also calling them to our institution or to our demonstration plots for them to see what it is they're supposed to actually support, because we need their support for funding from the exchequer. And out of that, we have had some good policies coming up. And also one of the greatest achievement for us is the declaration of bamboo crop as the 16th cash crop in Kenya. I think you can clap for us. A little bit, please. Because the bamboo story has taken us 34 years for us to reach there and for the country to understand that it can now be a cash crop. Number 7 is the sensitization of communities, especially ecosystem surveys valuation. We've done a lot of that. And now communities surrounding some ecosystems actually understand the value of conserving them and protecting them, where we have lots of community scouts. I'm not saying that it is happening in all forest ecosystem. No, it is with some ecosystems. As I said, research is site-specific, and therefore solutions are site-specific. There are areas where the communities take it up and they're able to protect themselves, but in other areas, there's still lots of resistance, and we are still working on that. Number 8 is development of technologies in terms of for restoration. I don't have to read all that. And this, we have seen lots of enthusiasm and interests in some of the technologies that we do, and especially on aerial seeding, which now has been almost accepted by the country as a technology to accelerate land restoration in Kenya. Number 9 is to mainstream the indigenous knowledge in this country. And I have here with my staff, I have those who are experts in indigenous knowledge, and we have come to understand the role of indigenous knowledge in forest conservation. And in some cases where indigenous knowledge and religion go together, and if forests degrade in those areas, we also see degradation of spiritual enrichment. Do you agree with me? Do you agree with me? Yes. Thank you so much. And then number 10 is development of sustainable forest-based value chains, especially in the drylands of Kenya. We have seen that working with people, borrowing from number 9, the indigenous knowledge is very key. And then we have seen that with our research and linkages to these communities, we have found improvement, marketing, and also improved livelihoods. And finally, the development of innovative technologies. I've said, as a forest pathologist, I know very well the importance of the environment. And for that, using the principle of species to site matching, we have developed a technology called Green Njamiti app. It is downloadable from your phones. It's free, both on Android and iPhone. And it's just a technology that KEFRI has developed to guide tree farming, tree establishment, because this country is different. There's humid to the drylands. So we need technologies that are suitable for the humid areas and also for the dry areas. So with that, I can say that linking research is not a choice. Linking research to people is not a choice. In fact, we should endeavor to undertake it wherever possible if we want to move forward with our communities. Investing in research is also important, because if you don't invest in research, you will not have a way of moving forward. And during the climate summit that was here just last month, we learned the value of building partnerships and also encouraging innovations so that we can tackle this, the triple planetary crisis. Of course, this is a shared responsibility. It requires you, it requires me, and I'm happy with the panel that is here. We are from diverse backgrounds, but we are here talking about forests, people, and livelihoods. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rahima Njaidi from Tanzania. I'm working with an NGO. It's called MJUMITA. This is a community forest conservation network. So we are purely focusing on community natural forest. And these forests are found on village land. So we are not into protected areas or government reserves. So it's purely community managed forest. So yes, I like the topic, how linking research with forest and livelihood. Without research, we won't be able to change the world. We won't be able to change communities' welfare. We won't be able to change even the policies that are existing. So for us, for me, for this panel, it has given me the opportunity to come and learn that we have to do more to be able to change what's happening on the ground. I can start for Tanzania. We were purely state managed forests since early 90s. That's when it became to change now to involve the communities. So these changes came on board because of the research that many people did that proved that by involving communities, We are not wasting time, not wasting resources, but we are trying to promote the conservation of these natural resources. And it has proved, so Tanzania, we have this approach we call the community-based forest management. And it's one of the approaches that has given Tanzania a spotlight in the world, I can say, where communities are 100% involved in managing their forest, and 100% of the revenue that they get from the forest goes back to the communities. So we have a lot of projects that are based on CBFM, community-based forest management, and we have seen the changes in the communities. We have seen the changes in the forest conditions, and all this is thanks to research that many researchers, even us practitioners on the ground, we do research to try to prove to the government that community-based forest management is working, because of recent years they've become a tendency of coming up with regulations, new political statements that in one way or the other, they tend to derail where we are right now in terms of forest management. And I would say it's a shame that those who had come to Tanzania to learn about PFM, about forest management, they're way ahead of us, and we're lagging behind because of these upcoming regulations that are trying to take away communities' rights into decision-making, who they choose to do tree planting, to do forest businesses with them. So we think that by coming up with researchers, we have a lot of universities of Dar es Salaam. We have the Tanzania Forest Research Institute. We have the SUA, Sokoine University of Agriculture. All these are trying to come up with research to inform the policymakers that this is what we want to happen on the ground. Now, the only challenge comes up is that if that research is not backed up by a political agenda, it will just be put on the shelf and it will not be implemented. We have good researchers with good recommendations, but they are not being implemented. We are piloting a project. It's called the Sustainable Charcoal Production Project. We're trying to show that we can still do sustainable charcoal in natural forest, and at the same time conserve the forest and improve the lives of the communities. For 12 years, we've been piloting this project. We did a lot of researches on that, and they've proved that the model we are using does not degrade the environment. And this has been all over the internet. If you just go Google the MJUMITA sustainable charcoal model, it has gained popularity on that. But the only challenge we're facing is it has not been accepted by our policymakers. So we are still trying to convince them that this is working. And if you go to areas where we are working on that model, you would see the differences that the forest is regenerating itself after harvesting. And we are going by a cycle of 24 years. So if you go today to a forest where we harvested 2 years ago, you would not even notice that there was any harvesting that took place there. Yeah, so that is something that we think researchers need to do more to promote their findings, to stand by their decisions or their recommendations, so that we can be able to really change things on the ground. For the benefit of the communities. And one thing that we've noticed is that many researches are being done, but many are just like for educational purposes. They are not there to inform the policymakers. They are not there to inform the decision makers. And one thing that you also notice is that I think Dr. Jane had mentioned the issue of engaging the policymakers. Capacity building for these policymakers, the decision makers, is very important. So for us, we really invest a lot in trying to build their capacity. We do a lot of trainings for these policymakers. We do a lot of producing simplified versions of the researches so that they can understand. One thing that we notice is that also the researches that are being made and disseminated, they're very complex for a person to understand. Even some of the practitioners don't understand the findings. So we go in depth, or we go an extra mile in trying to simplify those findings, remove all the graphs, the numbers and everything, just put it in the plain language so that the policymaker can really read and understand. And then he or she can really stand in front of other policymakers and advocate for that research findings. Yeah, so we've come across a lot of barriers. Yeah, without political support, your research will just be put in the shelf. Without political support, you won't be even given the permit to do research. And also now you're not supposed to do anything unless you go through the KEFRI of Tanzania, TAFORI. So, and then if your research in one way or the other will cause some kind of chaos, you're supposed to change some things in the terms of reference or even in your plans. So we think that also that political interference or the lack of support from the political side is also a barrier to researchers really digging into the problem for the sake of the forest and the sake of the communities. Yes, and we also fear change. We for example, for us, the sustainable charcoal model, it has been branded for a while that charcoal is the result of deforestation, degradation in Tanzania. But we went in details to do a research into all the area across the country, all 29 regions in Tanzania. We went to do research, trying to find like what is the real driver of deforestation. And it turned out to be agriculture. Agriculture was responsible for almost like 70 to 80% of the deforestation. And charcoal is a byproduct that I'm clearing this land for farming. And then what should I do with these trees? Okay, let me just burn charcoal. So it was not the primary reason why the land was cleared. The primary reason for clearing the land was agriculture. So we shared these results with the policymakers, with the relevant ministries, and still there's a reluctance to accept the reality. So that is the challenge I think we're facing as practitioners, as researchers across the country. And I don't want to take much of your time. So what I think that can help us to come up with researches that are implemented on the ground, the recommendations are put into practice. I think one is for like Tanzania, we are having this conflicting or competing land uses, agriculture and forestry. I think it's now high time we avoid working in isolation. Like the forestry sector should partner or should work with the agriculture sector, maybe do kind of a interdisciplinary kind of research, trying to see like how can we, both as these sectors, how can we come up with conclusions or with recommendations, which will be like a win-win situation for all sectors, agriculture and forestry, because we cannot stop people from farming because they need to eat and the population is increasing. But at the same time, how are we going to protect the land that we have, the forest land that we have? And if you go today to Tanzania, you would see the land that is managed by the communities is flourishing more than the land that is managed by the district authority or the central government. And it's because of the incentive they're getting that 100% of the revenue you're getting from the forest goes back to the village. And they decide democratically, like how are we going to use these resources? So there's a lot of community development there. There's building of schools, building of hospitals, infrastructure development. So it's all about trying to make the communities benefit from the resources. So yes, we do need research, but these researches need to be in action. So it should not just be left in the shelves. Or yeah, I think I have said enough. Maybe something during the discussions I can. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here with you. I'm delighted we're all here together, quite a group. I'm very grateful to our hosts and organizers. So if I rephrased Dan's question to us as, why do we need to do and to share strong research for impacts on nature and on people? I think of sort of two punchlines. They're pretty general. There are a lot of specific examples that will come up. I think they're related, and I think they're very consistent with what my colleagues have said, all of which has been super helpful. So first, I just think quite generally, we need to raise our game globally from, in terms of policy bar, from sort of just do something to effectively use limited resources. And what do I mean by that? For a long time, I feel like we've been fighting to just get attention to some of these problems, to get someone to get some resources, to have a policy. And you have this, hey, we have a policy. And I think that tends to be good. You think it's good, it's the way you want it to go, but maybe it's a bit too positive. I think we're learning that it's been a bit too positive. So I would say on the IPBES 2019 global assessment, and it had a 50-year mandate, and it's not like we haven't been trying to do something for those 50 years, and all sorts of indicators just keep going down, right? Now you might still say, oh, Alex, you're being too gloomy, something happened, isn't that good? And I think not, obviously, right? I actually think that putting resources into ineffective policies can actually block getting to better policies two ways. First, straight up opportunity costs. You've used the resources you've got. You've used the limited social capital you managed to get, the salience and attention you managed to grab. And I think it can be worse than that when we think about all the correct emphasis on equity and political economy and stakeholders here. I think when you put out a policy that's not working, but someone's making money from, you've now created a constituency for bad policy. It actually becomes quite hard to get rid of it, right? So the path matters. We want to draw on the science. We want to get stuff out there as soon as we can because the path matters. Okay, but you can also get a little bit too gloomy, as Rachel and I were talking about at lunch. So I'll say, we do have examples for people and for forests of policies that work. They have good outcomes. That's what we want more of. We need more research for that. And I'll just emphasize that, that said, there really are a lot of policies that have close to no impact or perverse impacts. And one of the ways to get there, I'll just say in terms of pushing research, I think has been, let me imitate something that, seemed to work over there. Because I actually think seemed to work over there has very often been more promotion than rigorous evaluation, right? And even for the things that might have worked over there, we very rarely get told this was the very special context where it worked. Don't even think it's going to work over here, right? That's just never part of the advertising. But as researchers, we know that that is true, right? And as policymakers, we know that's true. So how are we going to avoid all that? Coming to the second story. So really, this room knows exactly how to avoid all that. How to avoid all that is the flare thing. It's to think about, who are the people who affect nature? How does nature affect them? What are their default decisions, right? In the development dynamic that's local. What are the policies that might actually not only help the forest, but also say the forest here, but people. This is, what people have been saying all day and will say the next 2 days. Flare gets this goal, right? We are all stating it. But I still think there's only so much evidence out there on implementing it in the best way possible, right? We are having people be poor right now, and they have been for a long time. We are losing nature very quickly. We don't have really a menu of the things that have been effective for both. So I think even for this group, it is great to have this and share our lessons on the things that have worked. And let's be honest, the things that have not worked, right? So we can move on and do the ones that have worked. But that's not really my emphasis today. My emphasis, I'll say, I can borrow from something Ashwini said earlier today when he talked about essentially the failure of everything we just recommended. He said, a decade ago, we did this perspective piece and, no one's listening. And since I'm really old, I can say 2 decades ago and 3 decades ago, we did perspective pieces and still no one's listening. Another phrase is really what struck it for me. He said, it's all still instrumental if they're thinking about it. And I'm going to try to unpack that. For me, that meant, even though in this room, I believe people are blending like livelihoods for individuals and trying to keep nature together. Instrumental, I think, often might mean, imagine an imaginary conservation NGO that only cares about, natural outcomes and not about welfare for poor people. And I'm not saying that organization exists, but they would think instrumentally, right? And they might listen to us a little bit for instrumental reasons. And I guess what I wanted to say, and I said Ashwini and I were talking earlier, is that's my audience, right? This audience, you guys are already trying to do this. I actually think we need to sell this instrumentally in the following way. Even if you do not care, and you're not going to say it out loud, but even if you don't care about outcomes for poor people, you are not going to get the outcomes you want for nature if you do not take into account local interests and capacities and institutions, right? That's what I think we want to say as researchers, not because we don't also want to say, hey, let's work on the best way to do it with all of us who already agree, but because there's a lot of people and a lot of resources, a lot of agendas that at best are instrumental. And if we're lucky, we can convince them, okay, you don't have to care about what I care about, not to mention I can't convince you to care about it. But I might be able to convince you that you're not going to get what you want if you don't respect local process, inference, and preference. So I actually think that's a place where we need to go with more research. And you might think, you know, being an economist, I might say, well, of course, people will figure that out because they want these good outcomes, so they'll figure out how to get there. Somewhat true. We do see some rights designs, some market designs, some contract designs that respect equity and use local processes and institutions, and that's great. But we also see a lot of people not learning so fast, including because I don't think they're really benefiting from real outcomes. I think there's things I've now learned a new term, performance evaluation, kind of like I did what I said I would do, even if nothing happened, right? In which you're essentially rewarded for, oh, I spent money, oh, I drew a boundary of a park, oh, I created a program. If that's the rewards that people get, they don't really care about, I won't get to real outcomes. So I actually think we're fighting against that. But then also at the very least, we're trying to illustrate for people who aren't necessarily oriented to local process, institution, welfare, and preference, we're going to have that much more burden to raise the volume of our research, to raise the specificity of our research, and convince people who don't have to care about what we do, but who affect the world, you might want to go this way, the way we're going, if only for your own good. Okay, so I'll stop there. Thanks.
So that was already a lot. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to take 1 minute to summarize because our amazing speakers threw a lot of great stuff out there. So again, the general first opening question was just about why is it even important to be talking about this, linking research on forests and livelihoods to practice and policy. And what the speakers emphasized is that without this research, things just wouldn't change, and they certainly wouldn't change fast enough. And nowadays, we really need to be upping our game. And we need, you know, in terms of innovation and technologies and policy. But without the right types of research, including evaluating the policies and technologies that we have already, and without research specifically on livelihood impacts and community preferences, we might actually end up with worse outcomes. From Jane, we could see a very long list of potential benefits already from this research to practice pathway. And from Rahima, we also saw some of the realities we need to confront, that these things just don't fall from research and then end up with making it into practice, that there's real political barriers and acceptance of these changes that can stand in the way. So that's just the initial insights. And now we're going to dig into these questions in more detail. So don't feel like you have to answer every question because we probably don't have enough time, but also don't hesitate to answer the questions up at the front. So the first question then is just really speaking from your immense experience, and just generally, I'll go in this order, I guess. Speaking from your immense experience, you know, what lessons can we distill at the higher scale about what actually leads to positive outcomes, what actually leads to effectiveness in terms of benefiting livelihoods and conservation? And, you know, feel free to draw on specific examples.
I'm new at CIFOR-ICRAF. I've been here around for 6 months. And so ICRAF has been doing research at this interface for 45 years on the CIFOR side for 30 years. And so I'm blown away by the work that's been done. If I look at how CIFOR provided recommendations for the underlying causes for deforestation to the United Nations Environment Program, and that these were adopted, you know, by all governments, the work that CIFOR has done contributing to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and clarifying some of the aspects of clean development mechanism of the Kyoto Protocol, as well as criteria and indicators that have contributed to various certification schemes, including Forest Stewardship Council, the Indonesian Eco-Labeling Institute, ABAMA in Brazil, and the African Timber Organization. I think it's really amazing to see how when there's effective knowledge, it can really translate into policies that bring about needed change that really contributes to biodiversity restoration and to climate resilience. And we've also been part of the Forest, Trees, and Agroforestry Partnership, which was the world's largest integrated collaborative research program that was really one of the big reasons why CIFOR and ICRAF merged, because they both worked really closely on this project and really this interlinkage of how are we looking at forests and trees outside of forests, and how do we integrate the work at that interface. And so what else was also really interesting is the work we've been doing in terms of mangroves and the landmark findings that have revealed that mangroves store between 3 to 5 times more carbon than tropical forests, and generating worldwide interest from scientific community and media. And how can we leverage that into the preservation of mangroves, as well as ensuring that when we're looking at different types of ecosystem payments, that mangroves are prioritized. And also, we just finished the Global Landscape Forum here in Africa last night. Some of you may have been here. And so this was created originally a decade ago through CIFOR, and this really is dedicated to realizing sustainable and inclusive landscapes. And it stands as the world's largest knowledge-led platform on this really critical topic. And it's reached 2 billion people. It links over 10,000 organizations in its network and has engaged 185 countries in its events. And it continuously drives transformative change. And what's really critical is we need to up the literacy around the world, because as experts in the room, we can say, yes, we know what needs to happen. But most people up there, especially policymakers, they don't. And we know that the political cycle changes every 4 to 5 years. So we need to repeat it over and over and over again. And so part of it is, how do we ensure that we are contributing to enough literacy at the policymaking side, as well as the citizen side, to ensure that they're voting in the direction that we will ensure we bring forward policymakers that are going to bring forward the scientific knowledge that is generated. And then it's how can this be integrated into action and implementation, so that we're ensuring that we really have concrete projects and the right financial mechanisms to support them. And so it's really about how do we ensure that the whole system from research to impact is really enabled by policy, and how do we continuously realize that as much as we keep repeating ourselves, we need to continue until everybody on the planet gets it.
Is there any underlying thread? Because you had 11 examples leading to benefits. So was there any underlying thread of principles that led to more benefits? Maybe, touching on the importance of literacy, or the importance of these actually multi-stakeholder organizations, or is there something linking those, or just a lot of hard work in many different initiatives?
Thank you for that question. And what was the underlying principle for all those 11? Those are just a few examples that I chose to give. The underlying principle is the involvement of communities, that is public participation. The Constitution of Kenya 2010 actually outlines very, very clearly on the importance of involving the public in whatever you are doing, not just in research, but in any development. So what we have seen as an institution is whenever people are involved, it's a lot easier to implement an idea. It's a lot easier even to build up on an idea that you already have. Also acknowledging the role of indigenous knowledge in this country. And of course, we are very diverse. And that's why I said research and the solutions have to be site specific, because what will work in Lake Victoria will not work along the Indian Ocean, because the communities that live there. The underlying principle is consultation, linkages, networks, and very, very much public participation. We have seen in this country also where very well-intentioned projects have not worked because of the lack of ownership by the communities, and also let me use this example of one that failed. Was there was a project supported by the European Union in forestry. It was very well intended. However, something happened in one of the community forests, and one of the indigenous communities felt they were not treated well, and that project stopped. So the success to research, the success to development is getting the communities to go along with you.
Great, thank you so much. That was a very elegant three major components. Rahim, did you want to add anything to that from your perspective in Tanzania? Also, obviously, you work very closely with community, so I'm sure you don't disagree.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with Jane here on the issue of communities. The communities have been bombarded by researchers every single day until they're confused, like they don't know what is happening. So I would just say that, I mean, we have a lot of information. You don't have to repeat the same research, because that's happening. We're duplicating, or I don't know the right terminology, but we're doing the same research that we did 10 years ago. You're going to do it in the next 2 years. So there's a lot of that kind of issue. So I would suggest, let's give them a rest. Let's do the researches that are really necessary. And then at the end of the day, they should be informed of the results, because they're only being questioned. There are a lot of questionnaires, a lot of focus group discussions. But at the end of the day, when you go back, they'll say, oh, I'll just say maybe an X organization came here and they interviewed us in relation to gender and forest, but we don't know what happened with the results. We don't know what they did with the responses. So I would suggest that we should give those people down there a break. No, just do researches that are really, really necessary. And then at the end of the day, they should be also being given feedback of the researchers in a very simplified format. What we do, if we do research, we simplify them in the form of booklets, and also do like cartoons, so that they can read and understand due to their level of understanding. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Perfect. I'll try to be brief. I'll just try to add one idea. I think this is on. So I will go with research as a constraint. 3 different versions. I think it can be very helpful to try to get facts out there, or the best we can do with facts. So I'll first, to try to flesh out something I said earlier, go with, a constraint by conflict. So I was referring, for instance, to publications that recently came out saying that 90% of, red plus offsets are invalid. And that generated a lot of conflict. It even generated attacks on science, right? There were letters to try to get the professors fired. There were letters from these 100 scientists who turned out to be the scientists hired by the certifiers who had verified the false offsets, and that it was straight up conflict. But the rules have changed at the certifiers. Companies have written off what I think were hot air offsets, and this information served as a constraint on falsely moving ahead as if we were making progress. Great, not necessarily fun, but great, right? And then there's sort of constraint a la collaboration. Rachel and I were part of a group working on certifications, which were just mentioned. And I'll say I just don't think all certifications have had huge impacts. Depends a lot on where you are, depends a lot on which impact you mean. I'll talk about deforestation as measured by, remote sensing satellite data. There's a million things to be said. But in that setting, there were discussions in which we came across, there's a number of times where you can't necessarily show yet that this certification has changed the deforestation rate. I actually found it super interesting that this obvious response from a bunch of folks who work with certifications was, well, we never actually said we were going to change anything. What we said is, dear consumer, your product was produced in a fine way. What we didn't say was, dear consumer, we changed how your product was consumed. And it's the difference between search and impact. So what the certifiers may be doing is searching the world to find places that kind of already fit, which, by the way, are low cost to adopt the certification. So it's what you would predict, right? And that may be a lot of what's going on. That's not necessarily bad, but it's more transparent if what we're saying is, hey, those are good conditions, as opposed to claiming that we changed them. And that was a perfectly collaborative conversation. It's useful to know. I think that's sort of constraint a la collaboration. My last point will refer to Brazil, in which I'll just add the fact that whether you are in conflict or collaborating probably depends a lot on the politics, right? So I'm aware of researchers, NGOs, people in some of these seats who have worked a bunch with people in Brazil and been in situations where under one federal regime, it was a little more on the collaboration, how could we do it better? And on another federal regime, it was much more of a constraint on things that were not necessarily respecting, say, indigenous lands. So, you know, what you got to do with your research depends a lot on who you got to talk to and how it goes. But I think in both cases, you can see impacts for the Brazilian Amazon, and I'm going to stop here without details, both in sort of conflict constraint mode and in collaborative constraint mode.
So I want to revisit some of these comments in a second, but before I go on to that, Éliane, do you want to elaborate on any of the barriers that you've faced in these? Because you outlined some pretty high level epic accomplishments, but since the bar was quite high on these things, I wonder also if the barriers were also particularly significant and daunting.
So one of the things that's really critical at CIFOR-ICRAF is we have presence on the continents. We have presence in Africa, in Latin America, and in Asia. And so one of the things we say is you can't find anything in terms of one size fits all. And it's really important to be working with local stakeholders. I really loved, you know, the importance of community engagement. And in that case, you know, how are we integrating indigenous communities? How are we integrating gender? How are we ensuring that women's voices are informing how we move forward? And so for us, it's really about how do we ensure that we have a participatory process? And I think one of the things I would add is how do we go back to communities in a participatory process? Because they're really co-leaders of the research, and go back to them and say, here's what we found, and here's how we see this enabling moving forward, and here's how we're working with policymakers, and in some cases where we've actually been able to bring forward policies. And so it's really this idea of how do we ensure we leave no one behind in the research process. And we're not doing research for the sake of publishing in the best scored journals, but we're really doing research for impact that has last mile effect on indigenous populations and local communities. And so I'd say that's really integrated in our DNA as CIFOR-ICRAF, the critical importance of this work. That doesn't mean we're not publishing in the high impact journals, but it's really about how do we ensure we go beyond the academic side of publishing and really have that last mile impact. And so the barriers are, can we get enough funding for this work? For me, what I see is that there needs to be a lot more funding to support the scaling of this community work. And, you know, you're talking about satellite data. It's like, well, you could look at green spaces. It could be an invasive species. You know, it could be so many things. And so this is why it's so important when we're looking at restoration projects. Yes, it's nice to have the satellite data, but you also need the citizen science. You also need the remote sensing to, you know, really get the granularity and the transparency. And the standards are such that the science that is needed to have that is expensive. And we're not yet at a place where we value that. And so this is something that I would love to urgently see change.
The issue of barriers, I'll just add on to what she has said and emphasize on the role of funding. Barriers also exist at various levels. There are barriers to undertaking the research. There are barriers to knowledge and how people can engage themselves. There are also barriers at the implementation and barriers at the policy level. At the implementation level, we find that, as I said earlier, we have different levels of literacy. You find some communities easily understand based on the education levels among the community members, the greater members. There's also the barriers of gender. This is Africa, this is Kenya, where let me respect the men and say they own everything. And because they own everything at the local level, we also have to disaggregate the communities we are talking about and the kind of project that you are bringing in. But what we have found is when we have involved both gender at several levels, the projects are more successful. The barriers to research, as I said, forestry is not agriculture. It's not even like environment, the way you can undertake research and finish in 1 year. Forestry is to take you a rotation age, minimum 30 years. Imagine some of the trees that probably the experiments I started, I'm not likely to see them or even conclude them. What does that mean? It takes patience. At the researcher level, it takes patience. Most when it comes to breeding, you breed a species only to find that that species is only suitable for a certain location. And as Madam has said, it is so expensive, first of all, to undertake breeding research. So the barriers of funding, the barriers of understanding, the barriers of implementation, and also the cultural barriers. There are so many barriers that exist. However, to be a researcher, I tell you, you need more patience than anything. And also to believe in yourself, to believe in what you're saying. Sometimes as a forest pathologist, when I talk about diseases, even to foresters, they just look at me and like, what are you saying? And why should we give money? You know, you don't feel the disease, you just see the impact. You see the insects, and it's easy to respond to the insect and other types of pests, the big mammals, including you in my training, human beings form part of the pests. So it's easy to deal with you, but when it comes to diseases, the understanding and the implication of that is also a barrier. But it's also possible to overcome the barriers when you have the right partnerships and the right people to work with you, because you can never solve a problem alone.
I think I had mentioned a couple of barriers there, but I'll just add like one or two. One that has come across in many of our work, in many of the researches that have been done, is the issue of, I would say, she mentioned that issues of culture, socio-cultural issues. Women, you're going to places to do research and women are not allowed to talk, or they're not allowed to talk before the men talk, or they're supposed to say yes to everything that's been asked. So that is one. But again, I'll go to another level. We've come across issues of conflict of interest. Conflict of interest in the sense that the researches we do are in one way or the other are conflicting with the interest of I would say the TFS, Tanzania Forest Service. Most of the researches we are doing, we are promoting conservation. We are promoting protection. We are promoting community participation. And we are promoting the scaling up of community-based forest management in other areas. So by the time you're promoting community-based forest management in other parts of the country, that means you're putting that land into community ownership. And once you do that, the Tanzania Forest Service has no mandate again to go into that forest where they for business like charcoal or timber. So that is something that we've come across many times, and yeah, so there's a lot of advocacy that we are doing around that issue. So yes, those are the two that I remember. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. To try to compliment my colleagues with whom I agree. And because Dan's prompt to us also said, when could research be harmful? I'm going to go with two versions. One, lack of context, and the other, lack of design. So I'm pretty convinced that a lot of early payments for ecosystem services results claiming big impacts were not correct. And I should just be a little bit careful there. I think actually you can imagine passing cost benefit tests at the low levels of expenditures in some of these, even for small effects. But if what you've done is claimed big effects, as people did, I think it can be harmful, because you get people to imitate you, as happened across countries, across regions, thinking, oh, I'll get what they allegedly got. And that, I think that is harmful. I think that can lead to a misallocation of resources. So I think a lack of context, in what setting did you get it? What should you actually expect is a way to get harm. And the other one is a lack of design. And I'm going to choose a very particular story here, which is thinking about timing. So I think we know that people are forward looking. So if I announce a road is coming, people will buy land next to where the road might go. If I'm in the US and I announce that a species might be put on a protected list next year, this year, actually, sometimes people go find it and kill it to get it off their land because it'll be a constraint on their land use, right? So what about in social, all number of things? Like on the positive side, I think I saw in Costa Rica that if someone's neighbor got paid a payment for ecosystem service, other people said, oh, wow, this tree could be worthwhile. I have an option value, and they held on to the tree. So there was a positive spillover. What about the harmful side? Talking with Rachel, since she's not promoting herself today, when I was in Cambridge a few days ago, I think there's a story where some of these certifications, if they say, oh, you need to not have deforested, people will sometimes go deforest before they join the certification, and then they didn't deforest under the certification, if I have it right. And I actually think her group has tried to do work to take it out there to get people to get the design right. So a lack of providing the context besides the right evidence and a lack of the right design. I think we can do designs with risks for local people, with uncertainty, with payoffs to local people, with local institutions, but you got to want to write those contracts and not your random, oh, I'll copy something I heard was easy and would work.
Okay, so we actually, in that round, we already started getting into kind of how to overcome these barriers, and I just kind of want to maybe group together some of the things that have been said so far before we move on to some recommendations, maybe. But just to say that community involvement has been central in this discussion. However, it's the question of when and how to involve the communities, and when in the timeline, and the answer to that was always, multiple times, and not just in an extractive way, and then how to involve them, not just again in the data collection, but in the reporting out of the results, but also not just to involve men or elites or powerful groups, but to make sure to involve women, youth, other sort of marginalized groups. And just the other thing, again, to summarize, that was mentioned, I think is really important, is the funding. So there's a real need for improved funding models, basically, because at this point, it's not just good to be following up in extracting more information from communities. You need to be funding the actual participatory processes after that. But you also need to be funding scaling, and you need to be funding synthesis of existing data and data sharing and data protocols. And then all of this needs to be done with a longer time horizon because it requires patience, and especially, of course, with breeding, but also probably with value changes and things like that. So, on that note, those were just some of the gems. But on that note, I want to first speak to our leaders of that leaders in practice, leaders in policy, to ask, what are your recommendations to researchers, besides obviously not harassing communities over and over again, which has come through clear. But any other thing else you can think of? And then after that, putting your research hat back on, and again, and looping in Alex for this one especially, what is the most important new types of research we need to be doing at this interface to be maximizing the policy and practice benefits, not just impacts. So again, I will start with you with recommendations to researchers.
I think it's really important that researchers engage with policymakers. You can't expect a policymaker to go online, to go look at your papers and read them. You need to be able to do a 30-second elevator pitch to a minister of finance of why your research matters. And what I found is that policymakers really want to know what they should be doing. And if you take the time to talk to them, ask them what keeps them up at night, and what research you're doing can help them in terms of their agenda, their service to citizens, so their possibility of getting reelected. It's like we have to talk to policymakers through their lens, how they view the world. And as researchers and scientists, we're not necessarily trained to do that. So it's not something that comes easy. But what I've found is that as I did that, I've been invited by governments, by multilateral agencies to come and give them advice. And it's because I came to them and I said, what are you struggling with? And how can what I do and the community of practice of researchers that I'm involved in support your work? And so that's where I found we can really engage to ensure that the research we're doing really has that ability to influence policymaking.
Just to continue on what Madam has said, we need to create value of our research to the policymakers. And as she has said, elections are everything, votes matter. So by the time you finish your research, you'll find that it is a campaign mode. And that's the time you want to talk about that you found a plant with 3 petals. Well, that is very important to you. People are voting. Yes, and they are crafting their manifesto to run and to win. So we need other skills. We are very good researchers. We know the research protocol from A to conclusion and the references. But then we need other skills of getting to understand, first of all, the general environment. Sometimes I've sat in interviews and it's amazing how very good researchers have no connection with their constitution or even what the government's agenda is. So we must know what the government's agenda is. We must know the agenda of the local community. We must know the agenda of the international community and anyone else that you think you want to influence. So we must know the times, the context in which you're operating, and put or monetize your research. The world understands money. Is that true? You are all here because of money. If you didn't, one way or the other, you arrived here in Nairobi, I believe you spent some money. And you must have convinced someone to support you, isn't it? So let's put research relevance to money, and it will be easy for us to get at least a step higher. I have found that experience very useful to myself. When I have gone, like she has said, you walk that 9th floor of the Treasury, the National Treasury, and you're trying to explain what germplasm is. And for a long time, I was called Dr. Germplasm. Okay, the tree doctor and then germplasm. The people, the economists of the National Treasury, they're like, okay, what are you telling us? But what I'm telling you is we need to produce seeds from trees. And these trees are money. You can sell them, you can produce seedlings so that you create jobs, you create everything else, you create forests, you create rivers. You must have the whole context with you. So don't just focus on your area of research, get to know what I'm doing, another person is doing, so that when you put together, you have a good story.
Yes, my recommendation will be, let's communicate our results. That's it. It's a waste of time, you spending all those time in the field and then coming back home to your office and then you just sit there and don't talk about it. We have a lot of platforms to use to communicate the results. So I would say that's my biggest recommendation for today.
Super. I'll also be brief. I think for me, as much as I do believe that getting good information out there can be a constraint, in the end, I just don't see facts beating politics. Politics can beat facts anytime it wants to. So I think that happens. And so what is politics? It's, people representing their own interests. The money is there. Follow the money, follow the actors. What are they trying to achieve? And coming back, to my prior story, I think building more political economy, which actors could have interest in some version of what you're doing. From my point of view, which local actors could gain. From the instrumental point of view, how are you going to get what you want to actually happen? I just think the thinking is the flair thing. You all know this, you all say this. I just think pushing it harder on for those who aren't focused on that country and its welfare or that place You're not going to get those global public goods if you don't think harder about the actors and their interests locally. So I know I said it before, but that's what I focus on.
Oh, that's great because all those comments are really linked. And to be honest, I feel really naive sitting here hearing this because I mean, like I do have a lot of interlinkages with policymakers, but I'm definitely the model where I'm introvert, you know, sitting at my desk waiting for some policymaker to contact me. Really, I am. But it's such a nice entry point to just say, oh, well, you know, what do you care about? What's your agenda? What do you care about? I mean, such a great way to get in contact with people and open that door. And then, yeah, just to underscore, I mean, politics came up as then being so important to actually accomplishing your goals. But then, of course, we need to be studying politics and political economy more. So I'll just leave it at that for my questions, because now we have some time to take your questions. I thought that was extremely enriching. So was there, well, yeah, okay. That doesn't mean run out the door. That means to put your hands up, and then Daniel will field the ones from Zoom. So anyone?
Thank you, everyone, for incredibly enriching talk. I have a sort of interlinked question for you. Okay. So my question has to do, so I'm an anthropologist who deals in sort of long colonial histories as well of Southern Africa and West Africa more recently. And my question has to do with how it is that we kind of work with the colonial hangover of things like designated conservation sites, national parks, and also, you know, exotic species in forest plantations as a sort of almost new corporate version of colonial resource extraction. It seems to me that, you know, in a drive to a green transition, in addition to there being junk carbon credits, there's also not a lot of thought about the histories of our default positions on what will work with respect to forestry, and we kind of take these things for granted. And I would love to hear your positions on this.
One of the things I think is really critical is how do we question the biases we bring to the research we're doing? So I was living in Canada for 34 years before moving to Nairobi, and I had the privilege of working with many Indigenous experts locally and Indigenous elders. And what I found is really this idea of how do you integrate traditional Indigenous wisdom? So we call it too wide seeing in terms of how do you ensure that you're giving as much value to the scientific research that's coming out of academic research circles as the traditional Indigenous knowledge that comes out of millennial of work, living in harmony with nature, and the importance of questioning constantly, you know, where did I grow up and how is that bringing a certain lens to the work I'm doing? What was I taught? What is my background in my research, and how to ensure that at each step we're really questioning what are the blind spots that I'm bringing to the work I have. And for me, I mean, I've grown up on 3 continents, and so when I'm here, you know, moving back to Africa as an adult, it's really about how do I listen in to what people are telling me, whether it's researchers, policymaker, 100-year-old neighbor of a friend we went tree planting with, telling me about how he's lived and seen the environment change over time. So having that level of curiosity and openness and humility, I think for me are really critical.
That's a very interesting question. From my perspective, how do you deal with colonial hangover? Let's use forestry as an example. Forestry in Kenya. It has been a little bit difficult to convince the Kenyans that their own trees are better than the exotics. Yeah, you also know that the forestry curriculum is also what we inherited from the colonial government, to be precise, the British government. And in that curriculum, you find almost entirely everything about conifers. It's either pines or cypresses. And some point, going down south, we have the eucalypts and grevillea. And those 4 species, they are what you find in the Kenyan landscape. However, we know they worked well some time back when climate was good or when it favored them. So trying to now introduce another tree species has been a real problem, and it has been difficult. And that's when I talked about demonstrations. You have to go to the field, to the ground, and demonstrate that this tree species, it is indigenous, because we already know that our trees are not good. They are not good enough. So through our breeding program, we've been able to prove that some of our indigenous tree species are faster growing than what we have always believed are fast growing, the conifers, the eucalypts, and the proteaceae from the south. So getting over the colonial hangover takes demonstration. You must demonstrate that this tree that I've always known is branchy, is bad, can actually be good. We've had in terms of that, we've had over 30 years working on 2 species, or engineer 2 species, and surprisingly, they are the best adapting. And also, sometimes nature is good. It helps us overcome the hangover. Why am I saying that? Because some of these trees have died, and I have no apologies for those that have died. We had a lot of species. Lots of species were introduced in the 30s and 40s, but like the cypress, you only have 1, Cupressus occitanica, and a few others, maybe 2, 3, where they introduced over 20. The pines were many, and right now, we only have 1 species that is surviving in the environment, that is Pinus patula. But through breeding, we are also now able to bring others because we also fear it might be on its way out. So the colonial hangover will be overcome first by nature itself, 2 by education, awareness, demonstration, and bringing people to understand that these trees are actually better than you've always said. But you need evidence. Evidence-based talk is what will work to a greater extent.
Just a bit, even in Tanzania, we have this Tanzania tree seed agency. It's trying to promote indigenous trees. So there's a seed bank. So I think that is one way we can, overcome that hangover, and also try to educate the communities that respect your indigenous trees. So also promoting the indigenous knowledge of the communities, and also for us, the Miombo, just allow natural regeneration. We should not plant within the Miombo forest. Allow the seedlings that have fallen down to regenerate itself.
Thank you. I think I'm just going to, because you said anthropology, I try to add, really echoing, think of analogs to what Jane has said. And I'm going to use 2 phrases. One is illustrate trade-offs. I think one of the beauties of historical research like that could be, let's talk about what actually happened here, right? And that includes the political economy, so maybe there's some more trees than there would have been, maybe. But by the way, this group has now, been out of favor, and that had a long durable effect, socially, et cetera. So illustrating those trade-offs on all the dimensions you wish to highlight for policies, I think research is quite good about that, trying to elevate what it was. And then to mimic a word, but on the social side, demonstrating options. This was sort of the technical demonstration of options. I think research on, for instance, what do newly created local multiple use protected areas do? And do those things function as well as strict protected areas when you kick them out? That kind of study of when can local rights and outcomes be consistent with either local, regional, or global public goods is research that we are doing right now. I'm actually presenting on it tomorrow. So I think illustrating trade-offs and demonstrating options, both in the ecological side and on the social side, is quite possible.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for the conversation that we just had. So I have a question here, and I just want to hear the perception. Maybe it has been mentioned in one way or the other, but what is the current reality in inter-organizational data sharing across organizations, and how can we use data sharing as a tool to foster more holistic research? Because I think the reputation that we've had in cases where organizations are going back to do or to question the communities or repeating the same questions or doing the same research. I've had cases where researchers from different organizations are reaching out to authors of scientific papers, asking for data, and then it's never happening. So is that happening currently, or is there a reality of that starting happening soon? Thank you.
So at CIFOR-ICRAF, the Regreening Africa application is a platform that we use and in partnership with citizen science of smallholder farmers. Hundreds of thousands of farmers use it in Africa. And so it's really this bringing together of the data we have as scientists and the data of smallholder farmers. And so I think one of the things is, how do we create a data commons that really ensures that we understand the critical importance of indigenous trees? And one layer I would love to see is the biocultural side, in terms of the storytelling, the recipes, the medicinal plants, the rituals that come with those indigenous trees. And it's really, again, it's about how to value the history, the legacy, and the amazing knowledge that has been held, and how do we ensure that it continues to benefit? And I think how we're participating to that global commons is really critical, and how we ensure it's not just scientists. For me, it's really about how do we create benefits for smallholder farmers, for indigenous populations, local communities, and ideally also policymakers, so that we're really creating a community of practice that links different expertise together.
Thank you. Just to add on to that, I agree with you. Data sharing is not easy, especially with the raw data and the scientist has not published. Is a bit difficult to get. From KEFRI point of view, we are in the process of digitizing any piece of information that has existed over the last 89 years. And that has not been easy, even to convince the scientists, like those who are exiting the institution, to leave their data behind, has not been easy as well. But over the last 2 years, we've been able to collect a good amount of information from the scientists who left, and those who are about to leave, and those who are leaving, and those who are remaining. We are creating a digital repository where you can access any information or any piece of information that has been undertaken by KEFRI. And for that, we also do the acknowledgement, because sometimes people come, work, do a lot of things, leave KEFRI without a trace. You'll not even know that they're there. So we have also started the approach of creating value and acknowledging the person who collected that data. They may not have been published as such, but maybe you collected an insect. I keep going back to my field. Like we have a whole lot of collections of insects that have been collected since 1934, but acknowledging the person, they may not be living, but acknowledging that this insect was collected by so-and-so in this area, we believe is important. And we're seeing our scientists changing a little bit or a little more in terms of giving out the information and also acknowledging them and rewarding, especially those who publish a lot. So we hope to improve on that, but I can tell you that there's a lot of information out there from KEFRI to you that you can access free of charge.
Yeah, just briefly, yes, data sharing has been a problem, even in Tanzania. And I think since last year, I think CIFOR, through the OFESA project, is supporting the government to set up a database for information related to forest management. And I was involved in those kind of workshops. So probably in the next year or two, we might have something on the ground that is allowing for data sharing to be accessible, even among the sectors themselves, even among other practitioners. Yeah, so I think that work will be done in a few years to come.
Super. So here I actually think there's a little bit of good news on the research side. I think there's a positive spillover from sort of the accuracy, credibility, honesty movement in journals forcing people to get data available so things can be checked, since we're noticing that not everything was quite right. That was in some journal articles. And that interchange or sharing of data in what you might call conflict mode, right? We're going to make sure you're not lying. I think has spillovers to both efficiency. My colleague pointed out, maybe we could stop redoing the same thing over and over again and move on to the next thing. I think data sharing helps that. And also equity, in the sense of folks who might not have access to the resources to collect this or that, the data that's available could get them started and maybe be, a starter for moving to their own grant to do an extension. So I do think the sort of the journal push for the accuracy thing, I think could have some positive spillovers in that direction.
So we need to wrap up, but I just want to pause here because it makes me remember being in Paris like 7 years ago and trying to talk about at some point, what does it mean to be a community of practice for FLAIR? And here we have, what's that? 8 years ago? Okay, 8 years, yeah. 9 years ago. Oh my goodness. 9 years ago. Some lost years in there, I think. So yeah, what does it mean to be a community of practice? And here we have several charges, about just already a few things that we could be really thinking about more broadly than just sharing research at a conference, in terms of, confronting our biases and sharing those stories and lessons and demonstration, the whole sort of network of really research demonstration. And I've seen this work brilliantly in Brazil and with my research. And then of course, data sharing. So thank you for that question. I think we can be a lot more creative. There's a lot of good stuff happening, but we can be more creative, and somehow we have to get out in front of it, because if we ask our surveys in different ways, it's hard to share the data. So we need to be doing more in sort of data standardization to proceed data sharing. So anyway, I just want to thank our amazing panelists again. What an incredible group. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your attention. And yeah, turn it over to our fearless leader for the conclusion.
Yeah, no, the conclusion is the following. What a great day. I want to thank you, Rachel, for stepping in to moderate. This was a fantastic panel. I've had such a good day. It's been amazing to be a part of this. Really interesting new kinds of sessions that we've had. I hope you all have had a great day. Thank you.